I have so many buddies that do this. I see it in worship groups. It is so common for the worship pastor to feel like they have to work around their senior pastor. And I don't know if I have like a super great, like, this is the magic bullet, but you've got to have the conversation. And maybe it's not one conversation, maybe it's multiple conversations. And I think also too, sometimes we as worship pastors, especially because we're that Enneagram 4, I'm not, but like, I feel like that's a common, the Enneagram 7, where it's just like, I want to explore the space of my feelings and all of that. He needs to understand how I feel. Maybe you need to understand how he feels. Like, maybe you need to ask questions.
Hey everyone, this is Pastor Colt Straub.
Pastor JB.
And you're listening to the Other Pastors Podcast. We're so excited to have you joining us. As you know, the Other Pastors Podcast is for executive pastors, worship pastors, children's pastors, youth pastors, anybody who is sub-senior level, doing the work of the ministry, serving the Father year after year. We want to be able to support people who are in ministry. And today we are excited to be joined by our friend, Pastor Dave Dolphin. Dave, how are you today?
Man, I'm good. I'm glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've known you for, I think, about 8 years now.
Yes.
And we met each other, for those who didn't know, and for Jonathan, catching you up, we met each other through a mutual acquaintance. Our old technical director, Travis Hampton, worked with Dave at another job for years. And then we also got connected through a worship leader blog, or a worship leader
like a Facebook
group. Yeah. Worship Leader Plus. Got connected through that, and just made a lot of connections. Have gone out to eat a few times, and man, Dave has had a blog for worship leaders. What was that blog called?
Yeah, it's called Practical Worship.
Practical Worship, which a powerful, just blog about any ideas, tips, and tricks for the everyday worship leader. If you haven't had a chance to check that out.
You got the tagline.
I got the tagline, but I could not remember the actual name of the
That's hysterical.
thing. But it's really, check it out on YouTube. All sorts of great things. Are you still doing that?
It's indefinitely on pause.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I don't, it's still out there. I think that the information that is there is helpful. It's at some point, maybe I pick it back up, but at the moment, I kind of feel like I've said everything I need to say. And meanwhile, there's been some new people kind of enter into that same space that are crushing it. And it's like, okay, so go do the thing and I'll do something else.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So right now, that's something else for you. You're a worship pastor. You're also an executive pastor. What's the name of your church?
We are at Cherokee Hills Baptist Church, and we're like in the northwest side of Oklahoma City. It's about 350 on a Sunday. So we're not big and we're not small. We're like in that medium size where you're starting to see some like structure to some things, but the staff is like 5 people, and so you're starting to kind of like move in the direction where you need some structure, but it's not like we got multiple campuses and all of the things that go with that.
Right.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into ministry. I know you've done radio, you've toured with Christian artists, you've done all sorts of things. Tell us a little bit about your story.
I've been all over the map. When I was coming out of college, even in high school, I thought I wanted to be like radio, like that was my thing. Like I wanted to, like, seriously, I wanted to, like, my path was Mix 102.9 in Dallas. Like that's what I wanted to do.
I mean, low key, you got a good voice for radio. I noticed that like right away when you started talking.
I appreciate that.
I was like, dang, you got a radio voice.
And a face for radio too.
Yeah, so good.
But so what I wanted to do is, I guess the sick humor for radio. Anyway, sorry. And so I mean, like, even like when I was dating my wife at the time, it was cool in the 90s to make like a mixtape. But I didn't make a mixtape. I literally made me DJing. Like I talked in between the records, and I did the research on her favorite songs, and I made this tape. And it was kind of my way of introducing like this love and passion that I have to her. And we're married, so I guess it worked. But I did that, and I loved it for a moment. But there was like a certain point where like I feel like God just turned off the passion. And if you don't have passion for radio, the only thing left is awful hours and awful pay. And so it was kind of crazy though, because for the longest time I thought like, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. Like this is it. And I felt like I had that all secure until I didn't. And it was scary for a moment. And then I went and I found myself at like a production company that had like did books and music and a little bit of movies. And I led the production team and I did that for a decade. And then it wasn't until after that, like I was approaching 40 that I actually went on staff at a church. I'd always been involved in music ministry, and I'd served on the team. And like you'd mentioned, like there was a couple like small artists that we go get in the van and travel around and play at these, these 9 pew churches. But everything that I did, even though it seemed like it was like all over the place, the common thread was creativity and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So you that's your approach now to, as I was looking through some of your pre-interview questions, your approach to ministry is so awesome. And that like everything you're doing, even as a worship pastor, you look at ministry or as music as not the ends, but the means by which you can build relationships. You can coach people to the highest potential.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, even though the word says that, we, as pastors, we are to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. Not necessarily to do the work of the ministry. There's part of that, but like, how can you equip them to do that? How can you give that away? And so I feel like in worship ministry, there's so many things that we have to delegate. Like we have to find someone to play drums, to play guitar, to sing a female-led song if you're a male, someone to run the soundboard, because you can't. You either physically can't, or you can't be in multiple places at once. You can't be playing the drums and the guitar and running the sound at the same time, although we joke about that all the time. But there are things that you can delegate that you can do, but you also can delegate, which is you don't have to lead all the songs. You don't have to. I have a volunteer that sets up the stage for rehearsal. I have a document that says, here's the map of who's where on stage, and Kevin likes his guitar set up this way, but Colt likes his guitar set up this way. And set up all these different things. So it's one thing that I don't have to do, and it's one little tangible way that I can give that ministry away. There are some Sundays I'm not on the stage. I might be running sound, I might be cutting cameras, I might be playing piano, I might be standing next to my wife. And I'm telling you, like, some of the coolest moments is when you've prepped and you've poured into these people, you've led them to this moment, and it's Sunday morning, and the band is just crushing, like they're just crushing, and you're in the back of the room or next to your wife or whatever, and you're just like it's a proud dad moment, and that feeling is the best. And I've never been the type of person that's like, I have to be in the middle and I have to sing all the songs. That's just not been my MO. I've always loved to give it away. And one of the things that I think I'm really good at is finding what people are really good at, and what makes them special. And that can be with a worship leader. Like, if you sound like Sarah McLachlan, I'm going to use you differently than if you sound like Adele. And so certain songs match a certain voice, or a certain guitar tone matches a certain song. And so how do I set that person up to win? How do I push them to hey, I want you to share here. You're getting ready to sing this song. I can help you with it, find the verse or whatever. But I want these people to connect with you more than just that's the person that sings a song every now and then. I want them to hear their heart. I want them to build that relationship. At the end of the day, it doesn't need to be just me. The more connections that because people in the room might relate to me, but they might relate better to my 18-year-old daughter that's also leading next to me. They might make a better connection with the guy that's playing guitar just because of the way he dresses or the way he carries himself. That's my boy. If that guy believes it, then I believe it.
Yeah, I have an 18-year-old daughter that just preached in my youth ministry, so.
Right?
Yeah, right. I mean,
the best.
What you've just described is the formula to being a great leader. I mean, if you try to do it all, it's debilitating. Like for me, if I go out of town, one of the coolest things ever is watching my entire team take complete ownership of the youth ministry. Like I'm Like it's just
Yeah.
like you said,
Which is scary because the whole idea of like working yourself out of a job, because you're like, okay, well, what are they going to need me for?
yeah,
But one, I mean, there needs to be someone that kind of like holistically is pushing that vision forward. But two, maybe that frees you up to do something else. Like your
sure.
value doesn't come from I'm the youth leader. I lead this
Right.
team, or I sing this song, and I'm not. It's a real struggle. It's a real struggle to like, well, what would happen if I gave this up? But it is the best when you see your people and they surprise themselves in what they can do. They didn't necessarily think they could do it, and then all of a sudden they're like, look, Jonathan, I'm doing it.
Right.
And it's the best.
Yeah, I love it. I love empowering people. Like you said, finding gifts in others is one of the most rewarding things about being in ministry, in my opinion. So how long have you been a worship pastor?
I've been on staff at a church for just over 10 years. But
Yes.
I became a Christian when I was a senior in high school, and I was playing drums in the youth group and quickly played with like that. When I went to college, I was a part of the worship band that was there at the University of Oklahoma with at the time they called it the Baptist Student Union. They call it the BCM now, but like way back in the day, it was the BSU. And so I've always been involved in that. And I even remember like in my college Sunday school of my small little church, they were like, well, Dave plays piano. Why don't you lead us in a couple of songs? And so even as far back as there, I've done that. But even before like coming on staff at a church here, I had a normal layman day job, and I was a part of our worship team at our church. But about 10 or 15 Sundays out of the year, I would lead, and it allowed our actual worship pastor to do other things, to go on vacations, to go on mission trips. Worship pastors are never just the worship pastor, right? It's worship pastor, and they're in charge of the building, or they do the media, or in my case, I'm executive pastor, and so it freed him up to do the other things, the other duties as assigned, and so
we talk about that all the time.
Yeah. And 10 or 15 Sundays out of the year is a lot, for a person to come in. And it was around that time that I was like, oh, okay, I really like when I do this, I am fired up. I really like doing this. And I had to discover at that moment, okay, is this a hobby or is this a calling? And I had to wrestle with that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, to switch things up a little bit, all these years you've been on stage leading worship, I mean, you have to have some pretty epic moments, specifically something that's funny.
You mean embarrassing? Yeah.
Yes.
That even better. Embarrassing is always funny, to the listeners. So,
I was trying to think. I do remember one time. This is like early on. I wasn't even, I'm super green, and I was talking in the service. And I was trying to convey that, like, why it's a lot of time to pull a band together, and even the idea, like, why are we even singing songs to begin with? Like why is this a thing that we've included in our service? Because when you have someone that's teaching, like, that makes sense. But like, why do we sing songs? Why do we prepare music? Why do we do that? And so like that was the place that I was trying to lead people. And I said something to the effect of, I mean, anyone can come up here and just like share some words, but like it's a lot of energy to like pull a band together and to rehearse. And what I meant was that it's not a lot of work for the sound guy from that standpoint. Like, you just put a microphone on him and you push him up. Never mind. And this particular pastor, I mean, he spends hours. Like, you can't reach him in the morning. Like, he spends easily north of like 10, 15 hours on a sermon every week. And it's like being in a seminary class. So of all the people that I could have said this to, it was like the seminary scholar. And I said that, and everyone chuckled. And I was like, no, that's not what I meant. That was, and so I tried to backpedal the best I could. I fumbled through that moment. We sang the song, and then the pastor comes up and he goes, "Well, Dave, it was nice knowing you." And then he went into his sermon.
Oh my goodness!
And I think of that happened 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and I still think about that, where it's just like, oh, I was such an idiot.
You created a core memory.
Oh, and I still see that pastor from, and the first thing when I see him is like, in my mind, I don't say this out loud, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm so sorry I was an idiot. That was so stupid.
It's like one of those moments where you're like, oh no, put the words
Take the
back.
words back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, I understand. So tell us about like Christian artists you've traveled with. Colt had mentioned to me and on the podcast earlier that you've traveled with some Christian artists.
No one that you'd know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's I've done, now working in radio, we would partner with all kinds of people. Third Day, Jars of Clay, DC Talk.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So I had the pleasure to meet some people. Sonic Flood, honestly, Sonic Flood version 2.0, because the first record and the second record are two separate bands. And but like I was so impressed with them. Another group I was super impressed with is Big Daddy Weave. Their production company is on a completely different level from a spiritual standpoint. I mean, I've met a lot of production teams that are good, but like we're here to do ministry, down to the person that's pulling cable and doing catering. Like, they are so ministry minded. It just blows anything else away. So I've had the pleasure to do that. But like traveling, no, I mean, it's all like local people. It's all regional people. Now, I mean, because we're all here in Oklahoma, if I said Matt Blagg, you might know who Matt Blagg is, but you probably don't, and that's fine, because it still meant something. We would go to these little 9-pew churches, and he had like this kind of like R&B way of doing hymns that worked for those people, and it connected with older generations, but also connected with newer generations. And to see that happen, that he did like 150 dates a year, and sometimes I played drums, sometimes I ran sound, but a lot of it was just getting in the van and going somewhere and meeting a lot of new people, and it was really, really cool.
Yeah. Well, on that same topic, you kind of mentioned styles. Do you have any what would you say about the evolution of style over the years? Like, for instance, I bring this up all the time. I'm a saxophone player, which means in modern worship, I'm extinct. So,
yeah. Big Daddy Weave had that. There was that one song, In Christ. It had a saxophone at the end of it.
It did, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wondered if you what's your opinion about the evolution of worship? Is it a good thing? Is it an amazing thing? Or what would you say about that?
I was right around like Y2K is like when it really took a massive shift, right?
Yes.
That was we were moving away from pianos and organs to guitars and drums, and we had Passion and Vineyard and all of that. Like that was a pretty radical shift because we hadn't seen a stylistic change like that in so long. And I was here for it. Like I just, that connected with me. And but now what I'm seeing is it's less about the style and it's more about like how we're using it. Like my generation brought in Cool Church. There was this what we call the attractional model, and I think at the time it was exactly what we needed to do. There was something about if you take a church service down to its bare bones, it's an event, and we were executing that event rather poorly in general. And so some people, the North Points of the world, the Life Churches of the world, the Willow Creeks of the world, the Saddlebacks of the world, the Fellowship Churches of the world said, you know what if we executed this like at a high caliber level and to get people's attention? And I think it worked for a moment. But I think, especially because I've got kids that are teenagers and, moving into their 20s, like what I love about this next generation is, man, they don't care about even like you look at like what songs are popular on TikTok and Instagram. It can be a Sabrina Carpenter song, and then it can be Fleetwood Mac, and they're like,
I noticed that.
They just don't care.
My kids will be playing songs from the early days that if I showed them, they'd be like, Dad, this is trash. What is this? But since it's trending, it's like, oh, this is cool. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, my son, he listens to Green Day, the Chili Peppers, the Foo Fighters.
That's crazy.
Because I don't think this generation has really good rock. Right now, everything is all laptop music, which I'm here for the laptop music. But
808s.
but it's coming. It's coming. Just like
Yeah.
when Nirvana and Stone Temple Pilots hit the scene, and all of a sudden the hair bands were like extinct overnight. I think it's going to happen to laptop music. But to answer your question, it has become, what I love about these next generations is it's come more about like how you're using it, and I've noticed like, you know, my daughter who's like 18, like I'll play her a song like God of Wonders, and she's like, Dad, this is awesome.
Oh wow.
You know, or like this weekend, we're doing Here I Am to Worship.
Oh man, classic.
I don't know if you can see it back here, but I have my dry erase board over here, and it has all of, I'll do this, it has all, like, these are the songs that I've planned for the month. I don't know if you can see it, but Oceans has made the list, and we're just gonna do the bridge out. But I was just like, oh dang! I mean, coming out of Another in the Fire, and just like, you know, the bridge of that song is just something about like, that's kind of like this is what I'm gonna do about it. You know, the verse and the chorus of Oceans is like, this is the situation I'm in, this is what I'm going to do about it, and this is the God that I serve and the power that He has that allows me to be able to have my feet to be on that firm foundation. That's the stuff that this next generation cares about. If anything, they're like, man, can we turn off these smoke machines and like have a real conversation for a second? And so that's where I feel like style is going. Style kind of doesn't matter, and so we still have the drums and the guitar and a modern sound, but they're looking for something for substance. They're looking for something that, like, and I think that's why I think sometimes they gravitate back towards, you know, they're just as into how great thou art as they are in same God. They want something that's rooted, that like has stood the test of time, and so I think it's a great place, because it's like now we're starting to see, it's like, okay, you know, worship and the music and all that, in the midst of the fact that there's this like business corporate machine of worship. These people are like, okay, this is a means to an end. We're using this to accomplish something else. This isn't the end goal.
Exactly.
That's good. Good take, man. I love that.
Absolutely. So, Dave, you said you've been in full-time ministry for 10 years, and I know currently you're at Cherokee, the church you're currently at. But before that, what was the name of the church you were at for many years?
I was, if we're going to share a story, I probably shouldn't say.
Okay, that's fine. I won't say that. That's fine. I know you've been.
Because I think I know where you want to go, and so I'm not going to say the name. Out of fairness of, one, they've changed their name. Two, the pastor that was there is no longer there, and they're in a different place. Okay. So, but it was another church here in Oklahoma City. And
I didn't even think about that. We probably should keep anonymity with that. That's no problem. But you know, for those of us who have been in ministry for a long time, kind of one of the things that we keep in the back of our mind is how frail ministry can be. We serve and we come in and out day after day, but like that, a transition could happen. A senior pastor could leave. Something could happen in the leadership, and you never know. Just like any job, you really never know what tomorrow's going to hold. And you kind of walked through a season of ministry of transition out of your first job as a worship pastor into where you are now. And you have a whole podcast that you shared this on, and I'm going to put that link to that in the show notes. But if you don't mind, just can you share a brief summary of what you walked through?
Yeah, when I came on staff of that church, I definitely knew, like, there were some issues, and I was the executive pastor there as well as the worship as well, and because they had created this executive pastor position, it created some opportunities for some things to be taken care of. The interesting thing is that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was there for a reason, for a purpose. God had called me there to solve that problem. But anytime I tried to look past that, I never really got a clear picture. So eventually, things got better, things got fixed. A new pastor comes on. We're super excited about that, and we felt like, okay, we're moving on, like we're moving on to the next thing. But at the same time, I just never had that clear vision, and so I recognized, it's like, this might be maybe the job's done. And so this new pastor came in, and the first year was great. It was fantastic. But at the end of that year, some true colors started kind of coming out. And at that point, we did not see eye to eye. And I tried my best to work with that, but it continued to spiral downward, to the point where the short story is I was handed a piece of paper that says your last Sunday is this Sunday.
Ooh.
Now, there were many, 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 many steps that led to that moment. And if you do want to know the story, I put it in that podcast. The interesting thing about that podcast, because that was at the time where my YouTube channel was going strong, and I had this podcast anyway. And I was like, and at the very beginning, I was like, I'm going to tell this story because, you know, people need to know, because it hurt. This was a legitimate church hurt situation for me, my family. It wasn't fair. It was not fair. But I just felt like God was like, hang on. This is not the time. And so it wasn't until a year later that I felt like I had some healing. I had some perspective. And it's like, okay, no, now it is time to share this story, because other people go through this and they need to know that they're not alone. And I felt like I was in a position where it's like, okay, I can treat this moment fairly. I can call a spade, but I can also not be like, which is what I wanted to do like 9 months ago. And so it's just, you know, it's a matter of, man, I did not, for whatever reason, that pastor felt threatened by me. And so I was like, all right, okay. And the craziest thing is, and this is in the episode, at the very end of the service, they're like, okay, you know, our pastor's like, well, you know, our Dave here is moving on. I'm going to give him the microphone, and he can, you know, share. And we had not talked like, do say this or don't say this. And I felt like in that moment, someone handed me a bomb and said, don't blow up the church.
Ooh.
Because there's so many things I wanted to say. And it wasn't like I was in talks at that moment with this church, but nothing was solidified. I certainly didn't want to say anything in fear that someone from this current church that I'm at now were looking at that like, man, he's so sure and arrogant that he's already quit his other job, because that wasn't the case. So I had nothing to say, hey, I'm doing this. Like, I had nothing. And so, like, what do you say in that moment? And so my wife, who's super smarter than I, she's like, just point it to scripture. And so I did. But that was hard. And the interesting thing is that I think that pastor felt like if they could get rid of me, they would feel better. And then when I was gone and he didn't feel better, like, I realized quickly in that moment, as painful as that was, I got the best scenario, because it solved my it's awkward to come to work situation. And all my friends that were still there, they're like, because it went from bad to worse. And they all got involved, to the point where 3 months later, he wrote this manifesto to the elders about like why every staff member is awful, and basically said it's me or them. And he got about a page and a half through the manifesto, and the elders said, you're done.
Yeah, it's not a good look if it's everybody but you. So
exactly.
So,
if everybody's the problem, look at yourself.
Yeah, so that church has moved on. There's been some, healing. I actually, a good buddy of mine is the worship pastor there now, and he, like 6 months ago, said, "Hey, dude, I need a drummer. Would you be willing to play drums for this worship night we're doing on Wednesday night?" And it was the first time that I had stepped on that stage and done anything worship related on that stage. Dude, you look at me and I'm going to start to cry. Stop that.
No, I'm sorry. That's a beautiful thing. I want to hear this. It's emotional for me just thinking about that, because it was like one of the things I learned in that moment, because I've done things with that church since then. And and as hard as that has been, I've learned that it was an opportunity to replace bad memories with good memories.
Wow.
And so being able to lead worship on that stage and play drums and to be in that room again, like, as scary as that was one of the best things I can do. And not everyone that leaves a bad situation gets that opportunity.
Yeah,
that's so true.
That I got it.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, that's such an amazing testimony that, of course, now you're in a great place. It's an amazing testimony that for those who kind of live with that fear in the back of their mind that something could happen at any time, no matter what, God has you, in the palm of his hand. And if you just continue to seek his face and to let him walk with you through that valley of the shadow, he's going to direct you and make sure that you land on a proper footing. And then as I was looking at you like that, because it's such a beautiful story of reconciliation. Like you had years and years of just kind of broken relationships. And I know you said you maintained some connection with them, but I just think God is awesome in that he reconnected you with that church and gave you the opportunity to once again step foot on that stage and lead people in worship. And I'm sure that was just a powerful spiritual moment for you.
It was. It very much. And not everyone gets that opportunity, so I'm thankful that I got it. And I've learned things about myself in that moment too. I mean, there's been multiple things in my life where you're like, okay, God, is this real? You say that you are close to the brokenhearted and all these things, like, those are the moments where God gets to show you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. So how do you feel like that has affected your ministry moving forward? Just like, what do you take away from that?
Okay, so the church that I landed at now is the way that God uses it is like a healing station. And I think that's every church, but like I've just noticed with this one particularly, one of the things that we say is that we're here to restore, grow, and descend. And we didn't just like put those icons on the wall because we thought that seemed cool. We kind of looked at the DNA of our church and how God was using it, and we're like, we just have a high number of people that come here broken, like just on the heels of divorce. They just lost their, a child. Just all kinds of like broken stuff. I was one of 3 church or staff members that had gone through like some kind of church hurt situation. And so you just see how powerful that healing is. And then I've watched people that have come here broken through divorce, get the healing that they need, remarry. And then one day I'm walking down the hall on some random Wednesday night, and there's that guy talking to another person that I'm like, oh, he just got divorced. And that person is now sharing his story and comforting that person when someone was comforting this person 4 years ago. And then the cycle. So I've always known that, but I guess I've doubled down on that because I've been that. And I think that was the reason why I made that podcast episode, was not to like, oh, those people need to, they need to get what's coming to them. Although that was my feeling earlier on. It was, that's the most downloaded episode of that entire podcast, and there's so many people that have reached out to me, and it's like, I'm so glad you made that because I don't feel alone. And if God brought you through it, he'll bring me through it because I'm on the beginning journey of this.
It's so important to share experiences for that reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's one other thing during this whole segment I'd like to talk about is that you, as a worship pastor, have recently made it to where, or health reasons, I'm not sure exactly why, but you can't sing anymore.
I can't sing. I can't. Well, okay, so I can go la, like I can make a note. Okay. But the short answer is that in 2020 I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. The good news is that after 3 rounds of chemotherapy, like I'm done. Like I literally had a scan this week, and I meet with my oncologist tomorrow. But like I'm at a point where like every year they do scans just to kind of make sure. I've already looked at the website, everything looks fine, it's all clear, we're all good. Most days I forget that I was sick, and that's a gift. But the kind of the kind of chemotherapy that I was given is really harsh on the lungs.
Sure.
And then you combine that with, in 2021, I got COVID. Like I got the real COVID. Like right now, when someone says they have COVID, it's kind of like it's brought down to a level where it's like it's the flu. But but at the time, like there were some serious cases of COVID where, like I remember for 3 weeks, it knocked me down, and the fatigue that I felt when I had that it rivaled chemotherapy. Like I was so shocked at how much it felt like. I reverted back to all my just how I handled myself and carried myself when I was going through chemotherapy, and I now have a scar. Like you can see it in the X-rays. On my lung, that it did something to my lungs, and so I can't hold a note for like more than a word or two. So it didn't just happen overnight. Like it started deteriorating more and more, and then your voice is a muscle, like so if you don't use it, you lose it. So it's like anything else if you're doing any kind of training. And so, I've seen, I've talked with vocal coaches. I've met with ENTs where they take the camera and they shove it down your nose and look for nodules, and I don't have any of that. And so the only thing it's self-diagnosed, but the only thing I can think of is that my lungs are just trash. And I can tell even how I normally speak. But when you normally speak, you take a breath whenever you need to. But, back from my radio days, every now and then I get asked to make commercials. And I remember I got some work about a year or so ago, and I was doing, I was doing the announcer thing, and I noticed that as I was doing the edits, I had to take a breath much more frequent in those VOs than I've had in the past, and I was like, oh, that was like when I started kind of figuring that out. So, but I'm still a worship pastor. I'm still up there. I have a microphone. Now, they don't mute it, but they keep it really low in the mix because I'm not contributing anything vocally that they want to put in the mix. But there is something to be said about, these are people in the room that I have a 6-year, almost 7-year relationship with.
There it is.
And so just being there and them seeing me lead, I don't have to sing to do that. And that's the conversation I have with all the people on my team. I mean, the drummer may not have a microphone, but they're leading worship. And the way we structure our worship ministry is we don't have a worship ministry in production. We have a band and we have production, and they're all part of the worship team. Right. If you're pressing spacebar on ProPresenter, you're leading worship. So I'm in a situation I can't sing. Am I still a worship leader? You bet I am.
For sure.
It's one more thing where it's like, okay, there's one more thing I have to delegate out. That's one more thing that I have to push out that I can't do. Now, interestingly enough, if you to go back on this whole performance versus authenticity thing, so I actually did sing on stage last Sunday. We were doing the song "King of My Heart," and and typically if you do it like the record, it's female led, but the bridge is led by a male, and it starts low and it goes high. And I've never been able to do the high part, but the low part of it, we were in rehearsal on Sunday. I was like, you know what? I think I can do this.
Yeah, I can do
I don't
this.
think I can do it
There you
well.
go.
I don't think I can do it well, but I've shared my story enough times in the room that most people in the room know why Dave doesn't sing. And so so I was like, I think I can do it. And the cool thing about my team is they were like, yes, you do it, you go. And even when I was kind of yeah, exactly. And even when I was like, okay, it's not going to sound awesome, whatever. And I was even kind of beating myself up a little bit. And of course I went back to the live stream and I was like, it wasn't like embarrassing, but it was like, there's obviously something wrong. But I got a text today. I'm not going to say the person's name. There it is. I want to make sure I'm going to read ahead. I literally got this text that said, "Hey Dolphins, I want you to know how much it blessed my soul to have." I'm going to do it again. I'm going to cry.
That's all right, man.
How much it blessed my soul to have Dave lead the good song on Sunday morning. I pray often for this, and am delighted to be a witness to the joy of victory in singing. Indeed, God is very good. And it's like, at the end of the day, the music is a means to an end. What we do is a means, and it's the same thing with if you're a lead pastor. If you might really enjoy public speaking, you might really enjoy the research part of it, diving in and really getting to know. Those are all means to an end. The reason why because you can listen to any sermon you want to, but the reason why you have someone that gives a sermon, gives a talk, gives us a message is because that pastor knows their people. They know because he lives life with those people, and then he can curate a sermon that helps and meet those people where they're at because he knows them. And that is no different for a youth pastor. Yeah. That is no different than a worship leader. So I'm not going to choose the songs that are necessarily popular, although a lot of the songs that we do you would know. But I'm choosing the songs because I know my people and I know what they need. It's not about the guitar tone. It's not about the signal chain for my snare drum, although I care a whole bunch about that stuff, and I made an entire YouTube channel about it. But it's a means to an end to get to what we're really there to do.
So good. Hey, earlier, and you mentioned an other segment, which I definitely want to touch on this, because I think for a lot of listeners at the level that most of us, the listeners, will be serving at, you mentioned how you and a previous pastor's vision didn't align. So I want you to give just a brief little bit of advice to how to move forward, how to navigate that when you feel that tension, that conflict of vision, and what are some next steps? Like, how do you handle that? How do you walk through that?
Well, I see so often, I have so many buddies that do this. I see it in worship groups. It is so common for the worship pastor to feel like they have to work around their senior pastor. And I don't know if I have like a super great, like, this is the magic bullet, but you got to have the conversation. Like you have to. And even with the previous church I was at, that was me having the conversation. He had said something and done something where I was like that hurt. Like, what you did, that hurt, and we need to talk about it. And what I learned from that meeting about a third of the way through was like, oh, this isn't going to change. Because instead of like, I'm so sorry, what can we do? It was like, you need to get in line. You need to respect my authority, and you're out of line. I was like, okay, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so, but hopefully you do have a conversation, and maybe it's not one conversation, maybe it's multiple conversations. And I think also too, sometimes we as worship pastors, especially because we're that Enneagram 4, I'm not, but like, I feel like that's a common, the Enneagram 7, where it's just like, I want to explore the space and my feelings and all of that. He needs to understand how I feel. Maybe you need to understand how he feels. Like, maybe you need to ask questions. There was a guy named Andrew Stone, and he was the production director at Church on the Move in Tulsa, and he part of the Seeds blog and Seeds conference, and he was a part of MXU, and super brilliant dude. And he always would talk about, like, from a production standpoint, like getting to know your pastor, and you say, okay, what do you need from me? And it might be, man, I need a rockin' mix. Okay, sweet, we can do that. And he might say, you know what I need is, when I get up to speak, I feel I'm already self-conscious anyway. I need that microphone to be on. Like, I need to know that when I get up there, that microphone's going to work, and I'm not having to like fiddle with a switch, or it's late, or like,
man, I can feel that one though.
I just need that microphone. Can you make sure that my microphone's on, because it makes me feel self-conscious when the technology doesn't work, and that people don't have all their ducks in a row. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's not as cool as a rockin' mix, but we can do that. So I think it's like with any conflict. I mean, it's conversations. And then if you feel like you've had those conversations and it's not working, then it's probably time to move on, which is scary.
Yeah,
because the thing about, I had a buddy when I was first getting into vocational ministry. He said, here's the thing about working in a church is it's your church, it's your job, and it's your friends all wrapped up into one. And when all three of those are great, it's all great.
Right.
But if any one of those is off kilter, the whole thing's off kilter. And so when your job, because you can't relate with your boss, is going south, it affects your church and your friends and your family. Like, I remember when I got that piece of paper that says your last Sunday is a Sunday, I had to go and tell my family and my kids, who were like, grade school, middle school at that time, hey, that church that we go to, we don't get to go to anymore. And my daughter, oh man, why am I crying on your podcast?
It's an open space, man. It's a healing space.
Wake up for this. My middle daughter, who's usually pretty even kilter, she screamed, no, and I was just like, I just felt that as a dad. Now, we've walked through that, and there's been some amazing God stories, because they saw in the midst of that my faith was real. They were able to, I think it was some growing moments in their own faith. But it was good. But like, it might be time. It might be time to move on, and that's okay. If you're, and it might be because you have a narcissistic senior pastor. It might be that your visions just don't align.
Sure.
And maybe that, maybe you can have that conversation. Like, if you really like trendy on the cutting edge, and he's trying to be a little bit more, laid back and traditional, then maybe that's not a good pairing. That's okay. But I think we lean on like it's fine. I'll just work around him. Oh man, that if you have to, and that might be a season, but I would really put as much energy as you possibly can to make sure that relationship is as strong as it can be, because it affects so many things in a negative way.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked so much throughout the past several podcasts, and of course the Other Pastors podcast is all about pastors who are leading from the middle. They answer to a senior pastor, and then they also lead teams of people, and one of our things is serving up, down, all around. We're not the main man on campus, we're the other pastors. And it can be a very stressful place. Sometimes you can feel like you're being pushed down from above, like you're dealing with trouble from beneath, from the people that you are leading. And so do you have any advice to those who are leading from the middle?
Well, for one, there's a book by Clay Scroggins, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. That's a great resource to pick up. There is such a thing as leading up. And you can be respectful in terms of because sometimes, the people that are above you don't know, they don't have all the information. There's people that are on the ground floor that are they have the information. And hopefully this leader is, self-aware enough to get that information. And I'm fortunate that our senior pastor right now, he's so good at that. He is so good at letting the best idea win, and to if we push back on something, it's coming from a place. But I think that that senior pastor is feeling the weight. If you feel like you feel the weight of people coming up beforehand telling you it's too loud, or they think that, or I've had people right beforehand say, is that what he's going to wear? Is he going to wear that? I've had that. But if you feel like you've felt it at this level, your senior or lead pastor has felt it 10x, the whole weight. And I've been in positions where I've been the number 2 as an executive pastor. I've been in close circles, and I know how much I feel it. I can't even imagine when it's all on you. The buck stops with you. The next person in charge is Jesus. That's a lot. And so maybe
put it
that
way.
Perspective of even if they do some things that just seem kind of a little off, that's a stressful job. And so just perspective and understanding, the more you can get into their headspace, the better. And then, as you're leading downward, it's not about trying to get them to do things, but again, everything's a means to an end. And so even, it's not that I need a drummer, it's that I have a person, and let's create an opportunity for them to play drums so that we can have a relationship where I can be in their lives, and they can build a relationship with the people that are, from the stage to the people in the room, and then, obviously in the hallways afterwards, so that ministry can happen. I'm not saying that ministry doesn't happen during the 20 minutes where you're rocking out, to whatever song. But it's, we are paid for 40 hours a week plus, and we do a 30-minute set. What are you doing with the other 39 and a half hours?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Man, thank you for that wonderful advice. You're a man. So a lot of times we ask, actually every episode we ask, because you're a pastor, you've been doing this a long time, and we want our listeners to be encouraged, but we really want you guys to pray over our listeners, because you are right where many of them are or are going to be. So if you don't mind, could you say a prayer or just a word of encouragement over anyone listening?
I will pray. Let's do that.
I love that.
Do that.
Okay. God, I'm thankful for the people that are listening right now that are just in the thick of it. I don't think people understand just how hard ministry is, and it's because there's so much relationalness that's coming, and there's when you pour yourself out either in a message or in a worship set, and then someone comes up with a complaint that seems so trivial in the moment, and you're like, gosh, did you not just see God at work? And you just feel like you've emptied yourself, and people are like, what else you got? Or to walk through with someone that is in the hardest season of their life, and you cry with them, and you're on their shoulder, and you let them lean on your shoulder, and you take on those burdens only for them to leave your church 6 months later. Like, it's just, it's so hard. But at the same time too, especially as leading worship, like, there's such a uniqueness, just even our position on the stage, where we get to like face the opposite way in the room, and we can see God at work in the midst of people. And even as we sing these songs and we know the stories, I know there have been moments that I will stare at that couple that I know that's on the brink of divorce, or I know the couple that's been trying to have a baby for the last 10 years, and they just are exhausted. And just to know that these truths that we're singing about come from the Word of God that is sustainable and powerful because you put it into place. God, I pray for encouragement today for the people that are in ministry, that are maybe sitting in their cars right now because they are just mustering up the courage to go into the office again. Wherever they happen to be, I just pray for encouragement and longevity. I pray that you would just help them to see that what they do matters.
Yes.
Not because of their guitar tone, not because of their epic snare sound, not because of the validation they might feel in their abilities, but because you are a good God that loves people, and we have surrendered to a calling and a vocation where we can focus on this nonstop. So I just pray for encouragement today for everyone that's listening, and thank you for what they do because it matters. We pray this in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
That's a prayer, Dave.
Amen.
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 And that about does it for our time. If you are listening, please like or subscribe. Drop a comment. It helps push the podcast. We would love you guys to share everything we're doing here at the Other Pastors Podcast.
Remember, serving up, down, all around. You're not the main guy on campus. You're the other pastors. You're the other pastor. I got to get this tagline right. I'm going to do this again and edit this. Serving up, down, all around. You're not the main guy on campus. You're the other pastor. And this podcast is for you. Don't forget links and show notes. Everything you want to find for the other pastors, you can find at otherpastors.com. Dave, again, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dave.
This was fun.
Amazing.
Absolutely. And have a great day. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. The Other Pastors Podcast is brought to you by CommissionedClothing.com. Christian apparel designed to fuel your ministry and mission. Every order comes with a You Are Loved wristband, empowering you to share the love of Christ with someone in need. Commissioned Clothing is all about spreading the message of Jesus and living out His mission to spread the gospel to the entire world. For special discounts, you can visit otherpastors.com. Otherwise, check out CommissionedClothing.com and join the movement.